Allora, buon pomeriggio. Iniziamo quindi questo pomeriggio che sarà dedicato alla letteratura ermetica araba nella sua trasmissione latina. Non si sente? È per me un onore presentare il professor Charles Burnett. Come per il professor Moreschini è complicato provare a fare una sintesi degli interessi. Il professor Charles Burnett si è formato a Cambridge e ha svolto la maggior parte della sua attività didattica presso il Warburg Institute di Londra, alternando però lunghi soggiorni di studio e di didattica presso prestigiose università americane. Per esempio la scuola, l'Istituto di Studi Avanzati di Princeton. La sua ricerca si concentra su vari ambiti, la trasmissione di testi dal mondo arabo all'Occidente, specialmente nel Medioevo, attraverso lo studio delle tradizioni manoscritte arabo-latine, in testi che riguardano ora la filosofia, ora l'aritmetica, ora la geometria, ora l'astrologia, l'astronomia, la medicina, la magia, la divinazione. E il professor Burnett è stato responsabile di numerosissimi progetti di ricerca. Ricordiamo per esempio un progetto dedicato agli astrolabi ebraici, quindi le sue competenze in ambito scientifico, oltre che filosofico e paleografico, sono veramente notevoli. A questa formazione e a questa specificità così multiforme si accompagna ovviamente una produzione scientifica notevole. È difficile riassumere le pubblicazioni, dico semplicemente che numerosissime sono le edizioni critiche, numerosi i contributi monografici e altrettanto sterminati gli saggi e gli articoli scritti non soltanto in inglese. E per quanto riguarda il campo dell'ermetismo mi fa piacere ricordare perlomeno l'edizione critica del Liber Antimaquis, del Liber Runarum. Charles Burnett è stato il primo a fare l'edizione per l'Hermes Latinus, anche del Liber Antimaquis, e poi il primo a scoprire il Liber Runarum. E più di recente ha pubblicato per i tipi di Sismel un testo di Tabit con la versione anche ebraico-araba, oltre che latina, con la collaborazione di Gideon Boak, un testo di Tabit sui talismani, a cui si accompagna un testo sulle immagini attribuito a Tolomeo e un libro, un Liber Prestigiorum, Tebitis et Hermetis. E numerosissimi, poi volevo aggiungere un'altra cosa, i contributi di Charles Burnett rispetto al ruolo dei traduttori. E a tutto questo poi vorrei aggiungere vari ricordi personali che contraddistinguono la relazione scientifica con Charles Burnett. I met Charles Burnett first time at the end of 1998 when I was a fellow, Francis Yates fellow at Warburg Institute, and from that time to today, we had so many occasions to change our research about Hermetic tradition. For example, I remember the colloquium, magic
and the Italian Renaissance.
No, magic
and classical tradition.
And the classical tradition.
Yeah.
The classical tradition. Okay, so I thank you so much, Charles Burnett, to be here, and Charles, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Antonella, for such a generous introduction. I expect you all to know both Arabic and Latin, if not some Greek and Hebrew as well. Can you hear me? This should be, yes, right. And this is for what?
Just a second. I suggest you just wait 2 minutes because students are coming. Oh, okay.
Oh, well, I can talk a little bit before starting my talk. They come. No, Antonella, as she says, I mean, we've been cooperating for many years, collaborating ever since she was at the Warburg Institute, which is where I am, in 1998, you said, which is some time ago now. But I've been very happy to watch her development in Hermetic studies, and I've been very much involved from the beginning with Paolo Lucentini on his Hermes Latinus project, to which, as Antonella has said, I contributed some additions in the first, in the volume on Astrologica and Divinatoria. Yeah, Divinatoria.
Just they are.
Yeah, well, they will, yes, they're just arriving, yes, so they're coming after all. So this is useful. Have we got enough copies?
Siete pronti?
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm glad that you've all come to hear me. I think you've come to hear my English. I won't be speaking any Italian, but I hope that my English is comprehensible and even a pleasure to listen to. In order to, if you find it difficult following my talk, then I think you have access to a copy which will be approximately what I say. I'm afraid I will be extemporizing a little bit, or adding a sentence or two in some places, but this is basically what I'm saying, and if you want to be reminded of what I've said, then you have this copy with you afterwards. As Antonella said in her introduction, my work has been primarily on the transmission of Arabic scientific texts into Latin in the Middle Ages, and this occurred especially in the 12th and 13th centuries. So my focus has been on the Middle Ages and the very interesting, well, what I find very interesting, and I hope other people do, process of transmission, how the translators tackled a language which was both completely different from their own language, the Latin or a Romance language, and how to deal with texts which were written by Muslims or Arabic within a Muslim realm, and translate these into texts within a Christian realm. In fact, I would say that at a scientific level, when you're translating secular works, you disregard the religious boundary between where the translation, where the text came from, and where the texts end up. And what I want to talk to you about this afternoon is, I assume, is very much a follow-up from what some of you have already heard on Monday and Tuesday. Unfortunately, I'm very sorry I wasn't able to be with you on Monday and Tuesday, so there might be a little bit of repetition, but I hope that what I can say supplements rather than repeats what you have already said. And I'm being aided by a PowerPoint, so if I hope this will work well. And I shall begin. Philosophy in the Middle Ages, whether written in Arabic, Greek, or Latin, is largely regarded as peripatetic, the development of the works of Aristotle from logic through natural science or physics to metaphysics, finessed with Plato and supplemented with the works on mathematics. University education in philosophy is marked by a series of glosses and commentaries on Aristotle's works, and in chronological order, from the Arabs, Al-Farabi, Ibn Bajjah, Averroes, and then passing over to the Latin scholars, Albertus Magnus, Thomas Aquinas, and so on. And this tradition culminates in the 11 volumes of all of Aristotle's works, with all of the commentaries of the Arabic commentator Averroes, published in 1550 to 1552 in Venice. The origins and the development of this tradition can be traced in detail and involves no divine revelation or demonic participation. There's no Faust in Faustian tradition here. But there was an alternative curriculum in which Hermes takes the authoritative position of Aristotle, and which can be traced to or from the mists of antiquity. The origins of this curriculum are described in one of the texts of this tradition, the Arabic Kitab al-Ma'aditis. This title doesn't make any sense in Arabic, but is probably a transliteration of the Greek Mathetes, which means the learner, the book of the learner, someone who is actually learning various aspects of science. And in this book, we come across a creator figure called Hardus, who is instructing Admanus, that is Adam, in logic and kalam, that's the Greek, the Arabic for speaking about God, the hidden sciences and subtle operations, and the cultivation of all manners of plants, knowledge of all the benefits and harms that are in moving animals, brute animals other than man, and the secrets concealed in the spiritual forces established in their limbs. This is a curriculum already of a distinctive collection of sciences. He showed him the use of plants and trees, teaching him the rewards reaped from their powers, and informed him of the secrets of mining ore, extracting metals and combining them with one another. This knowledge was summarized as the knowledge of all hidden and obvious operations. One may note that this knowledge was preeminently practical, and we learn that it involved the making of Nayanjat, a word which took on a specific meaning, which I will explain later, but which could have still retained its original Persian meaning of magic nirang. The first Niranj prepared Admanus for learning everything that Hardus taught him. The spelling Admanus and his companion Haiwanus, equivalent to Eve in the Bible, or as well as Niranj, of course, suggests Middle Persian, the language spoken in Iran at the time of the beginning of the Arabic realm in early 8th century, 722, and parallels to this tradition can be recognized in Zoroastrian ideas, the Zoroastrian being the main religion of Iran, of course. It is highly likely that this knowledge was thought to have passed through Persian until it reached Arabic, and this is quite, and we know that this was a stream, an active stream from Persian to Arabic. This knowledge was passed on from generation to generation until it was received by Hermes. The name, of course, comes from Greek. The tradition comes from Greek, whose books were in turn taken up by Aristotle and formed the basis of his instruction, Aristotle's instruction of his royal pupil Alexander the Great in the early 4th century BC. Hence, it is called, by modern scholars, the Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetic tradition. These books survive in a large number in Arabic, where their origin is repeatedly mentioned. For example, in one of the texts, Kitab al-Istijlab, a work on catching animals without spears or nets, but appealing to their spiritual forces alone. We hear that the contents are, I quote, what Hermes explained of the hidden secrets of subtle wisdom that Hardus had imparted to Admanus, or Adam. These books appear under various names. Madatis, I've explained, as Mathetes, the Book of Hermes on the crafts involving moving animals, the Kitab al-Ma'aditis, interpreted by Aristotle the sage and mentioned by Aristotle to Alexander the king in Al-Istamatis, the Kitab al-Maknun, which means the concealed book, and the Kitab al-Makzun, the treasured book, which are repeatedly quoted in the Kitab al-Ustutas. So we have all these these strange names. They don't make any sense in Arabic. Many of them, or several of them, seem to evoke Greek names, but there's no evidence that these works were translated from Greek. They travel together in the manuscripts and are usually accompanied by no other work except excerpts from the Brethren of Purity, the Icona Safa, the Fratelli di Purita, which draws heavily from them. Among them, we have a situation of books within books, and you have here we are. Here we have what you could call a Russian doll kind of situation, where we first of all have the Kitab Ilal al-Ruhaniyat, the book of the causes of the spiritual forces, abbreviated as the Kitab al-Madatis, that we've come across already, whose first part is the Kitab al-Ustutas, which contains two sections of Kitab al-Makhzun, so quoting Kitab al-Makhzun, one on lunar mansions and one on the Kitab al-Istijlab, which I've just mentioned as the book of drawing out the spirits of animals. However, the precise relationship between these books, their order of priority and their date are still to be worked out. All that one can say for certain is that they predate the Brethren of Purity, the Fratelli di Purita, and the Gayat al-Hakim, a great work on magic from the, which was also translated into Castilian and Latin, which were both written probably in the 9th and early 10th century, and they may represent the oldest Hermetic texts in Arabic literature. As I've already mentioned, we don't in fact have a tradition of Greek Hermetica, or we cannot identify Greek Hermetica, which were also quite numerous, being translated into Arabic. So we can say this is the beginning of a tradition in Arabic, perhaps based on Persian sources. Their contents can be divided into two parts, one theoretical and the other practical, and trying to build up this corpus, this alternate corpus, to the Aristotelian peripatetic tradition. The theory gives both a chronology of the history of the world from its creation to the present day, involving vast lengths of time during which spiritual forces coalesce, first of all to form the planets in succession, and finally, with a great burst of power resulting from all the planets except the Saturn being in their highest positions in respect to the Earth, i.e. their exaltations. And at this point, Hardus himself appears, and by a concentration of thought, he produces Ad Manus, the first man. Then there are descriptive sections which describe the relationship between the megacosm and the microcosm. The megacosm, the great world, literally, has as its outermost component the firmament, under which is the corporeal sphere of the 12 signs of the zodiac. The 7 planets, which are spiritual entities, I mean, you notice that this word spirit keeps recurring, and act as doors through which the spiritual power of the firmament passes to the signs of the zodiac and to Earth. Man's head corresponds to the firmament, his chest to the sphere of the 12 signs, and his feet to the Earth. Through the 7 doors of his head, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth, which are assigned to each of the 7 planets, the spiritual influx passes into the chest, where it rules the 7 interior organs, the heart, the stomach, the lungs, the liver, the spleen, and the 2 kidneys. In each of these organs resides one psychological faculty, such as intelligence, anger, love, etc. Spiritual forces dominate through these accounts. I could go on and on about this. I mean, how many spirits there are in each of the parts of man and what their effect is. Secondly, much of the Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetic is taken up with practical instructions. These can be divided into 3 major sections: on lunar mansions, Nairanjat, and talismans. The sections on lunar mansions give instructions of what to do or to avoid doing when the moon is in each of its mansions. That's the parts of the zodiac or the ecliptic circle which it occupies every day during the month. So there are 28 or 27 or 28 of them. And I can show you a picture of here are the first of the mansions. In fact, you can see 6 and 12 of the 28 mansions, each describing a particular constellation of stars, but very different in concept from the signs of the zodiac, which are also constellations or bits of constellations, but mark the movement of the sun along the ecliptic through the year. These are groups of stars in which the moon stays, that's why they're called mansions, on each day of the lunar month. So you can describe this as being relevant to lunar astrology rather than solar astrology, astronomy. So they give instructions of what to do or to avoid doing when the moon is in each of its mansions, including the making of Naranjat, but also give the character of the baby born at that time. And there's one more illustration here. This is from one of these Arabic Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica, where we have a description of the manuscript of the mansion Shaula. Okay, you can't see. But also in the margin you have a depiction of the asterism, the constellation, which belongs to Shaula. And we have here Kaola Wulida fi hayatihi, etc. And this is whoever is born on this day. If he is male, he is wicked, immoral, and a spendthrift, and he will not be praised for anything. This is not a translation of this, actually, but it's a typical prediction. If the child is female, she is immoral, concealing her dissolute life, a favorite among men, and desirous of them. So we have for each lunar mansion, each of these 20 mansions, this what we might call, or what is called in astrological terms, choices or elections, deciding what to do when the moon is in these various positions. We have a mixture of that and what we call birth horoscopy, determining the character of the child born at this particular time. Thirdly, the section on Nairanjat gives examples of how to make Nairanjat for particular purposes, in order to love someone, in order to get the hatred of someone, in order to get the affection or the support of the king, in order to avoid being made impotent, and so on. The Niranj is the operation of mixing and cooking a carefully chosen and precisely measured range of ingredients. You cook these ingredients together in a brazier at a certain time, wearing certain clothes and so on. And then the fumes from cooking this stuff become, as it were, the spirit, which then spreads, dispersed, and has power over other human beings and other animals. And the power of the spirit can be increased by chanting at the same time, which embodies the spirit of the voice, which is independent of the meaning of the words. So the words can be nonsensical, or at least not understood by men, but the spirit within those words, the chanted spirit, I suppose you can think of something musical as well, has an effect on the outside world. And finally, there is the making of talismans, which involve bringing the celestial spirit or spirits into terrestrial objects. I can give you, yes, here's an example of the talisman of a scorpion. Talismans are made of various materials. The materials are determined by the planets whose influence or whose spirit's influence you want. And for the scorpion, of course, you want to, for making a talisman of a scorpion, you want to entice the spirits of the zodiac sign Scorpio, which is attached to Mars, so the spirits of Mars are also important. And the position of Mars and the position of Scorpio determine the time of making the talisman and of putting it into effect. And of course the main effect of the talisman of the scorpion is to get rid of scorpion or other other nasty beasts in your environment. In Thabit ibn Qurra, whose work on talismans in Arabic and in its Latin and Hebrew translations was very important, gives examples of summoning spirits. I mean, you summon these spirits by saying, "Be present, O spirit of Venus," or whatever, in this operation. But a version of talismanry, you can call, the art of using a talismanry, without spirits and suffragations, without the burning of the Nairanj, relies entirely on the effects of planetary configuration. But nevertheless, these celestial effects are described as the soul of the talisman. A talisman is made out of an organic material, but is useless, it's dead, until it receives the soul, which the practitioner entices from the celestial realms. Some of these texts were translated into Latin. I've just given you a picture here of the main place where these translations were evidently made, and that is Toledo, which became the intellectual as well as the ecclesiastical capital of Spain after the reconquest in 1085 from the Arabs, of Al-Andalus. And we know of one work, the Kitab al-Istijlab, which was translated very probably by John of Seville in Toledo, and Antonella has provided the first edition of this text, which is called De Quatuor Confectionibus in Latin. So and we know of another book from this corpus called the Liber Antimaquis, which is largely based on an Arabic text called the Kitab al-Istamatis, and we have maybe the most popular, and that is the Book of the Moon. I've already said that under the 28 mansions of the moon, we know what to do, and we know the character of the child. Well, this text was translated, in fact, several times into Latin, and if you remember, this picture where we have the asterism in which the moon is located, marked in the margin, and we have the same text basically in Latin here, and the asterisms are marked as circles. Each circle is a star. The circles are not in a configuration, but are just in lines, so it's not so useful in the Latin text. But you do have Latin texts in which the figures, the configuration of the stars is more clearly marked. So we have evidence of this transmission made mainly in texts without a translator. We don't know who translated the text. John of Seville, though, is very likely one of them, and it's very likely to have been in Toledo in the mid-12th century, which was the place where the translations were made. So this, I want you to bear in mind that this is one corpus of Hermetic texts, the corpus known as the Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica, because they're attributed to Hermes, but it is Aristotle quoting these texts. Aristotle says that Hermes says in the process of his tuition of Alexander the Great. I mean, this didn't happen. We know that Alexander the Great did have Aristotle as his tutor, as one of his tutors when he was a boy, and there are other texts, especially letters from Aristotle to Alexander, which prove that there was some relationship between the two, but there's no evidence that these particular texts in a Greek form were part of his tuition. What is noticeable is that we are talking about a practical tradition, and this is reminiscent of a division of natural science that is alternative to the 8 divisions, again, of the peripatetic tradition that developed depending on Aristotle, and which has an Arabic source but is best known in a Latin version. I've missed out this very important quotation, because the Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica were regarded not only as being very useful for affecting things through talismans, through tarot and chart, through knowing when to do things, but also for raising man to a very high degree because of the relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm. And this is expressed in this Latin text, the Liber Antimaquis, which I've just referred to, where, having described all the elements of the microcosm and macrocosm relationship, the author says, and because of this, man can attain all things through his deeds, and can know all things, can remember all things, and say every word, and hear every voice, and operate every operation, because there are in him all the manners of spiritual virtues, and because of this, man is called the form of all forms. And this is a very important statement, just showing how through this particular let's say curriculum of learning, one can get the impression of being the perfect man, if you like, the perfect person who is able to change things in the world, hopefully for the good. But very quickly we can also look at this, this alternative between the practical physics, you might say, natural science, and the peripatetic tradition of physics, which is a theoretical division, which is very well known through its tuition, its instruction in the universities. It's divided into physics, cosmology, generation of corruption, actions and passions, stones and minerals, soul, plants and animals, on a theoretical level. And I think Antonella was talking about Albertus' division of science, as it were, and Albertus Magnus was very much involved in this particular curriculum of natural science. But the practical division, which originated, it seems, in Arabic, which we know in a translation of a work called On the Rise of the Sciences, which was taken over by a translator in Toledo in the mid-12th century called Dominicus Gundisalinus, who wrote a work precisely on the division of philosophy, and was taken up by someone called Daniel of Morley. But here, these are all practical sciences: astrology, medicine, nigromancia secundum physicam, which appears to belong to the division of talismans in which you did not use celestial spirits or subfumigation or burning things, but was entirely based on the influences of the stars. Then you have talismans which would have been based on using the powers of the spirits, but also practical sciences of agriculture, seafaring, alchemy, and finally optics. But what I would like to spend the next half of this talk on is another aspect, or another corpus indeed, of Hermetic works. And the whole series is on the Hermetic tradition. We've also already described the Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica. But there's another group of works which are associated especially with the translator Hugo of Santalla, who was working in the cathedral of Tarazona in the mid-12th century for his bishop, who was called Michael, who was bishop from 1119 to 1151. And it was Michael, according to Hugo, who sent him to the library of the last of the Banu Hud kings of Saragossa. These were the Arabic kings of Muslim Saragossa, who were in fact driven out of Saragossa in 1110 by the invasion of another Arabic kingdom, as it were, called the Almoravids, who progressively who reconquered part of the part of Al-Andalus which had been conquered by the Christians. And so the Banu Hud, who were very friendly with the Christians in fact, were driven out. And here we have a lovely picture of the Tarazona, the cathedral of Tarazona, where Hugo was working for Michael the bishop. And here we have the fortress of Reda Khalon, to which the kings, the Banu Hud kings, were driven out in 1110. And Michael sent Hugo to the library library, which they must have taken with them on being exiled from Saragossa, and asked him to seek out in the more serious depths of this library, the Latin is Inter Secretiora Bibliotheca Penetralia, certain manuscripts. And this probably refers to the part of the library devoted to non-Islamic books. I mean, the rest of the library probably has, the Quran, the Hadith, and works of Islamic theology called the Fiqh. But there was a more secret part which only the elites or the initiated were allowed to go into. And this must have been where Hugo found these manuscripts of works attributed to Hermes and Apollonius, which he then proceeded to translate. It is significant that on the first page of one of these translations of a manuscript, which could well have been written within Hugo's lifetime and under his supervision, we have a vivid portrayal of the transmission of science, to which Hugo wants to subscribe or insert his translations, as it were. And this, in fact, is the one of the illustrations on the advertisement for this series of lectures. This is the top half of this frontispiece, you can call, and we can see, three very important elements. First of all, there is the division of sciences, which is like a tree diagram, with scientia at the top, and scientia is divided into sapientia and eloquentia, i.e. the, the practical or the scientific sciences, and eloquentia is the sciences of speaking, logic and dialectic and so on. We have most of the well-known sciences here, arithmetic, for example, divided into mathematics divided into arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. For some reason, we have a very detailed account of the divisions of music amongst those, but we also have ethics and politics, and one interesting thing is that scientia is at the top, that is the highest most science, as it were, or element of knowledge, which in turn is divided into sapientia. Philosophia doesn't appear in this particular schema. But the next thing but the schema, I think, is there in order to place within it this new knowledge which is coming from Hermes and Apollonius. And so first of all we have Hermes, you can see on the left-hand side of the page, a description of Hermes, who is described here as being the same as Mercury, who is the Roman god Mercury, but also the planet Mercury, because of his knowledge of many arts. We've got the description of so many arts there in the schema, who was called Trismegistos, we know, or Trismegistos, we know this name from the classical sources, classical Greek and Latin sources, i.e. thrice great. Mercury here is described as meaning speech, for Mercury is so called as if he is a god running in between, so running in between the celestial regions, probably God himself, and man. He is the messenger god, and that's why we can learn so much from him. But then in the bottom of the same page we have Apollonius, and here we see a depiction of Apollonius sitting on a chair, and there's an inscription underneath saying that he is a philosopher and so on. But the text itself, we can go on to the next page, indicates that Apollonius is also, or can also be described as a magus. I mean, the three magi of the New Testament are very familiar to you. He's a magician from the East, as it were, or sage from the East. Or you could call him a philosopher, and this is, and he says, as the Pythagoreans passed down, so it is as if he belongs to the Pythagorean tradition, which, we could go into that in more detail, but which is another non-Aristotelian tradition of science based very much on mathematics. And we see here that he's said to have gone through all the, passed through all the known world, as it were, through the Persians, the Caucasus, the Albanians, the Scythians, the Massageites, and so on, until he arrived at the Brahmins. And this is an indication that his knowledge was supposed to come from, or additionally, from Indian sources, because here he was listening to a Brahmin sage called Yakas, or Arkam, who was sitting on a golden throne, and he was teaching among his disciples about nature, about morality, about the course of the stars, and here we have another curriculum of learning, and other things indeed. We know about this wandering of Apollonius because already in classical times we have a biography of Apollonius who did live at the same time as Jesus Christ, and became a kind of mythical sage. And this information is brought onto the frontispiece, the first page of this text, which is a translation of a work attributed to Apollonius. Now, sorry, that was a bit of a digression, but I think it's just very important to bear in mind this wonderful frontispiece, which has so much information about the Hermetic tradition, or as I've called in my title, the Pseudo-Hermetic, the Pseudo-Aristotelian and Pseudo-Apollonian Hermetic tradition, because Apollonius is an important figure here. But to go back to Hugo Santallensis, this is a frontispiece to one of his translations, but if I can just go through all his translations so that you can get an idea of what this corpus of Hermetic works consisted of, and some comments indeed of Hugo on this corpus. I shall just briefly go through the wonderful texts that he translated, which are really well worth studying. First of all, there are texts on astrology. I mean, if you're dealing with astral science, if you're dealing with any sort of Hermetic text, you're well aware that it is the stars, the planets, that have a central role in cosmology, and especially in respect to the spirits that come from them and affect things in this world. And for any astrological calculation, it was necessary to have accurate tables to predict the positions of the planets and the fixed stars. Thus, it is probably not by chance that the work Hugo explicitly mentions as that for which his master, Michael, Bishop of Tarazona, sent him to Rueda de Jalon to fetch, was Ibn al-Muthanna''s commentary on a work on how to use the Indian astronomical tables of al-Khwarizmi. Here we have Indian knowledge passed into Arabic by the great mathematician al-Khwarizmi at the beginning of the 9th century, and here commented upon by Hugo in the mid-12th century. There follows the classical work on astrology by the 2nd century astronomer and mathematical scholar Claudius Ptolemaeus, called the Tetrabiblos in Greek, but called the Quadripartitum in Latin, and the Kitab al-Arba, the Book of the Four, in Arabic. And this work on astrology sought to provide the physical and cosmological reasons for astrological doctrine. It included, among different accounts, the Egyptian division of the terms of each of the signs of the zodiac, compiled by Hermes. So Hermes is one of the authors referred to in Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos. Ptolemy is transmitting the knowledge of Hermes, and this in fact became the standard method for dividing each sign of the zodiac into different sections, each attributed to one of the planets except for the sun and moon. There are several Latin translations, well, there are 2 Arabic translations and several Latin translations of the Tetrabiblos, translated from Arabic rather than from from Greek. And Hugo's version is based on an Arabic text which was distinctly manipulated to suggest the divine origin of the truths of astrology. We keep coming across in this corpus the fact that it is God, it is through divine inspiration that one knows the truths about the world. This sort of divinology, as it were, may have been the responsibility of Al-Kindi, the great Arabic philosopher of the 9th century. And this was since it was used by the astrologer Abu Masha, Al-Kindi's pupil, he further emphasizes this divine origin, referring to astrology as seeming to happen by some divineness, or quadam divinitate evidetur contingere accidere. We've had this, and here is the quotation in Latin. In the middle, these things seem to happen or occur as if by some divineness. I have in fact put in italics the extra phrases which are not in Ptolemy's original. Next comes the astrological work, the 100 Words, or the Centiloquium, which was attributed to Ptolemy and was always regarded as being by Ptolemy until sometime in the Renaissance, in fact, whose 51st word of the 100 Words was Hermes' method for predicting the time of the birth of the child. This was called the Trutina Hermetis, and it relates to the where the sun is, where the moon is at the time the sun is in the degree of the birth, degree of conception, the child will be born. This text, the Centiloquium, emphasizes the importance of the refined soul, open to divine influence, in making accurate predictions or discovering secrets. This idea is encapsulated in the first aphorism, that the secret of the stars comes from you, the astrologer, and from the stars. And in the summary of the argument of the first few aphorisms, that the sapiens dominabitur stellas, so the wise man will dominate the stars. So he will understand what is going to happen in such a fruitful way that he can prepare for what is going to happen. I mean, it doesn't deny that things are going to happen, but he can also, to a certain extent, manipulate things for the better, in spite of the certainty of the movement of the stars. And this reminds one, again, of what we have in the Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica, where man dominates. I mean, he is able to do anything, he's able to hear everything, he's able to see everything, and so on, because so it elevates the position of man. And then we have another astrological text translated by Hugo called the Book of Aristotle, containing the sum of the 255 volumes of the Indians, note Indians again, on all questions relating to birth horoscopes and anniversary horoscopes, among whose authorities were allegedly the 13 books of Hermes, which they call the Book of the Secrets of Nativities and Interrogations. These are two astrological terms. And another 8 books by the same author concerning the inner mind in deliberating and what issue those thoughts will have. This idea of what is happening within the mind, which is again open to God's inspiration, is really very important, and goes as a kind of leitmotif, that one is not just observing what is around you in nature, the positions of the stars and that sort of thing, but one is drawing from the rich resources within the rational soul, which is the highest part of the human mind, and which, as I say, is subject to the influence of the higher celestial bodies, you might say, and to God himself. Later in the same text of the Liber Aristotelis, we read that Hermes is the leader in this teaching, just as he is in all other disciplines. So you have here again the authority of Hermes. And that people think he is the same as Bujur-Mir, the Persian sage. One can see here not so much the transmission of wisdom from ancient Egypt as, again, from Persia, and beyond that from India, a line of transmission of occult texts which we can actually trace. The fourth book of the Liber Aristotelis, the book of Aristotle, can be shown to be a translation by a work of Andasagar ibn al-Farukhan, meaning in Persian, the wise advisor called the son of Farukhan, which is a distinctly Persian name, but is given an aura of antiquity by being attributed by Hugo to Buzurg-Mihir, the Persian sage who was the counselor of the Persian king Khusrau I Anushirvan, the great patron and encourager of the arts in Persia in the 6th century AD. I'm sorry, I'm emphasizing again, this is what Hugo is picking up is a Hermetic tradition which does not go back to ancient Greece, as you might expect it to, but to Persia and beyond that to India. While the Liber Aristotelis is on the interpretation of birth horoscopes, and those cast on every anniversary of the birth, you consult your astrologer on every birthday in order to find out what's going to happen during the following year and to take precautions against it. Hugo also translated or revised translations of 7 Greek and Arabic authorities on astrological questions or interrogations, including Aristotle again, not from Greek, but the Arabic version of Aristotle and of the other Greek authorities. Note that in this work there appear in several guises in Latin with an implied Arabic source, a work also attributed to Ptolemy, but it makes sense to include this work in the Pseudo-Aristotelian Telica of what I call this alternative tradition. Aristotle retelling the texts of Hermes. Prominent among these sources is Umar ibn al-Farukhan, another astrologer of Persian origin, who translated the Tetrabiblos and Dorotheus' Carmen Astrologicum from Persian, having originally been in Greek, into Arabic, and to explain the ability of the astrologer in the following way. I quote this just to give the atmosphere, or the spirit, as it were, of this elevated position of astrology within this textual tradition, this what you might call the Hermetic tradition, that there is a divine force, or the divine force, and the property of efficiency of the celestial circle at the time of the question itself. We're dealing with interrogations. The client is asking the astrologer for advice about whether to get married, whether to go on a journey, etc. So at the very time of the question, the celestial circle seems to be passing on to the intelligence and mind of the questioner an answer by a certain similarity. For the movement of the circle, these are the celestial circles or the planet circles, compels the questioner to put this particular question. For the human condition does not cease to imitate the order of the affections, or love, hate, etc., and the progression of as much of the celestial stars as their orbits by the bond, as it were, of a certain love. Here again we have this close connection between the microcosm and the macrocosm, which in this context is described as being the same kind of connection as you find between two people who love each other. The divine force and a special branch of astrology was that of weather forecasting, which was carried out by the observation of the movements of the stars. Hugo chose to translate text which he introduces as the Book of Rains, produced by an ancient astrologer of the Indians called Jafar, but then abbreviated by Mercury of Cyllene. Here Hermes is called by his Latin name Mercury, but Hugo shows his knowledge of Greek mythology, in which the god Hermes was born in a cave on Mount Cyllene in Arcadia. The subject matter significantly is based on the Indian doctrine of the lunar mansions, here we have the lunar mansions again, and their influence on the weather. The second category is divination by other means than astrology. I shall be briefer about these. Hugo, following the Centiloquium, would agree that one did not need astrological knowledge to predict the future, but rather divine inspiration. And he would have known from Isidore of Seville's etymologies that the divination could be made from all four elements. He thought he recognized in the Arabic divination of San, the Ilm al-Ramal, what Isidore had called geomantia, division by earth, using the Greek etymology. And his term, geomantia, soon became the standard term for geomancy. I could explain the principles of geomancy, but basically they're drawing lines of dots in sand or in dust, or on a piece of paper, and then adding them 2 by 2 and making figures, and the figures went, the 16 different geomantic figures will tell you about future and hidden things. Geomancy stands out as being the preeminent form of divination in which the state of mind, the intentio, or in Arabic the damir, of the geomancer becomes primarily important. The damir evidently is very close to what we find described as the reason, the rational part of the soul in the Centiloquium, and hence is open to divine inspiration. This is pointed out by Hugo himself, who in the preface to his Geomancy claims that human beings, I'm not sure if this is up here, no, we can come back to that. Human beings, though they have descended to the rank of mortals, nevertheless retain in the form of images what they knew before they were born, because God has poured a kind of intellectual notion of things into the secret places of human hearts, man's hearts. I miss out another form of divination, which is by the shoulder blades of sheep, which is also attributed to Hermes. But at the heart of his translations, however, is the most philosophical of these works, On the Secrets of Nature, De Secretis Natura, or in Arabic, Fisir al-Khalika, written by Apollonius, or attributed to Apollonius of Tyana. Apollonius was a magician, as I mentioned, who lived in Syria at the same time as Jesus, and many legends developed over him. In the text translated by Hugo, he is said to have discovered this book in a cavern under a statue of Hermes. In this cavern he found another image of Hermes, before which there was a book, the book on the Secrets of Nature itself, and in the hands of which was an emerald tablet. The first volume of On the Secrets of Nature reproduces this book. It covers God and creation, the circles of the planets, the fixed stars, minerals and vegetables. The second covers animals and especially man. Included in the book are questions about nature, such as the origin of thunder and lightning, whether trees are male and female, why thorns are necessary, and so on. The purpose throughout the book is to point out the underlying unity in all nature and the bonds connecting all things. Conspicuous is what we may call a biological approach to nature. The elements are alternately male and female, and from the mating of male elements, fire and earth, with the female ones, fire and air and earth and water, are born everything generated in the universe. The text ends, here we can see Hugo's translation, ends with the emerald tablet, containing the words which became one of the canonical texts of alchemists in the Arabic and Latin world. A set of enigmatic sayings, beginning higher things from lower things, we can see next here, Here's the Arabic original and an Latin the text and the English translation. Higher things from lower things from higher things. The operation of wonders from the one, just as all things draw their source from one and the same thing. It goes on in with this very hieratic language, mentions the makers of talismans, working their wonders, but above all, it talks about how to mix things so that the lower things become higher things, something very familiar in the context of alchemical practice. It may not be chance that the Asclepius, the first work of the Greek Corpus Hermeticum, also ends with a hymn. I've said there is no relation, but there is this wonderful symmetry, or very curious symmetry, that we have the book of the Secrets of Nature ending with a hymn. You could say it's a hymn. There is poetry, there is rhythm in this, just as the Asclepius ends with a hymn. The frontispiece of On the Secrets of Nature would naturally introduce the whole corpus of Hermetic works translated by Hugo of Santalla. You can just be reminded of that again, this frontispiece, by showing how these works that he was translating fitted into the division of science and giving portraits of both Hermes and Apollonius. What we have here is a Pseudo-Apollonian Hermetica. Hugo's prefaces to these works that he translated emphasize the importance of the significance of the works. Man can gain knowledge contained in these works because of a divine endowment. Human beings, although they descend to the rank of mortals, nevertheless retain in the form of images what they knew before they were born. I've already mentioned that. We can go a little bit further forward. Here we have, God has poured a kind of intellectual notion of things into the secret places of men's hearts. Moreover, God has bound certain men who are endowed with special intellectual gifts. He's bound them together as a kind of intellectual elite, I suppose. What emerges from these prefaces is a picture of a special bond between men who have been privileged to receive God's gift of intuitive knowledge. This bond, which produces a state of peace in human society, is parallel to the bonds which govern and preserve the universe as a whole, as is described in the book On the Secrets of Nature. Now, as time is running out, I shall just very quickly say what is curious. What may seem strange is that we have this group of works called the Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica, which stay together and which seem to have been translated from Arabic into Latin together, probably in Toledo. And another group of Hermetic works attributed to Hermes and Apollonius, which Hugo Santalliensis had access to and passed on to the Latins. It might seem strange that Hugo does not know this, doesn't seem to know this Pseudo-Hermetica, but the Aristotelian Pseudo-Hermetica. But in fact, he probably did know them because his colleague, his very close colleague, Herman of Carinthia, working in the same area of the valley of the Ebro, did know them because he quotes from two versions of a text of Istematis in his original work on the essences, and refers to this Apollonius's descent into a cave under the statue of Hermes to find the book which turned out to be the Secrets of Nature. So I would say, in conclusion, that the Pseudo-Hermetic and the Pseudo-Apollonian Hermetica evidently had some influence as a way of engaging in science which was independent of the Aristotelian tradition, and as such enabled a person to realize his or her full potentiality both in knowledge and in action. They were passed on from Arabic into Latin and continued to be transmitted, albeit as eminently or predominantly secret knowledge throughout the Middle Ages and into early modern Europe. I think I've spoken enough.
Thank you so much, Charles, for this rich and very clear paper.
Clear, okay.
I learned so much. I talk in Italian just a few minutes. Questa relazione del professor Charles Burnett, così ricca e così puntuale, ha messo in evidenza un altro volto, un'altra facies della letteratura ermetica, anzi potremmo dire due volti diversi: il corpus pseudo-aristotelico e il corpus pseudo-apollonio di Tiana, quindi altre due tradizioni all'interno di questa gigantesca tradizione ermetica. E soprattutto colpisce l'individuazione di un'altra area geografica che oggi è emersa per la prima volta rispetto a quanto è stato detto nei due giorni precedenti. Siamo partiti, no, dal mondo greco, dal mondo egizio, poi ci sarebbe dovuta essere prima la lezione di Burnett e poi la ricezione in ambito latino, ma per ragioni appunto pratiche è stata fatta un'inversione. Poi si arriva al mondo latino attraverso però traduzioni, testi dall'arabo che sono a loro volta, che vengono però dalla Persia. Questo è veramente, e dall'India. Quindi questo è un elemento molto importante. Quindi il professor Charles Burnett ci ha spiegato i contenuti che si rintracciano all'interno di queste due tradizioni testuali in maniera in maniera molto molto precisa, e come dire, i testi della tradizione pseudo-aristotelica sono testi prevalentemente pratici, anche se c'è comunque una premessa teorica. C'è una tradizione che è connessa all'astrologia. C'è invece una tradizione che non è connessa all'astrologia e che semplicemente fa leva su le qualità, i vapori che vengono emessi bruciando gli elementi organici della mistura, della confezione, mentre invece la tradizione, quella attribuita ad Apollonio di Tiana, questo De Secretis Naturae, di cui ci sta il libro di Pinella Travaglia, un libro che è uscito parecchi anni fa, no? È una tradizione che presenta invece testi più legati alla tradizione alchemica, perché il De Secretis Naturae nella versione latina, no, si conclude, ma mi sembra di capire anche nel testo arabo, appunto si conclude con la tavola smaragdina. Quindi questo testo principe dell'alchimia ermetica, che si basa sulle corrispondenze tra alto e basso. Io avrei una prima domanda, però forse lasciamo prima lo spazio ai borsisti, al pubblico specialista. Vieni.
So, thank you for this delightful talk. I have three questions that might seem naive, maybe, because I'm not an expert, of course, on Hermetism. So on the correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm, I'm curious if there are some sort of channels that might help to travel, a la Chaldean oracle, for example. So if those are channels, or how does something travel from up to down, from down to up, even further maybe?
one thing that I omitted, which I'm sure Antonella will agree with, is that throughout this story we have in the background the figure of Al-Kindi, who is called the first philosopher of the Arabs. And he not only assimilated and especially Platonized or Neoplatonic text, Aristotle's text, but he also wrote his own cosmology, as it were. And one of the most interesting works that he wrote was the De Radiis, which several of you might have come across, which has as its subtitle the theory of the magical arts. And I think it's quite convincing that he says that rays are connecting everything.
Like
and as long as you pray to the stars along a ray, I mean the words themselves are rays which are going towards another object, not necessarily a celestial object. It could be an object at the same level, an animal or even a human being. But as long as those rays are in conformity with the celestial harmony, as it says, they will be effective. Yeah. So this is one way of explaining how the universe works, as it were, through the connection of rays. And I would say that what Al-Kindi says about rays is very similar to what is implied, but not said so explicitly, about the action of spirits. I mean, the spirits could be the rays, or the spirits could be traveling on the rays, as it were. Yeah. And what is, because the spirits have exactly the same, well, there are many kinds of spirits. There are the very anthropomorphic spirits, as it were. We have the names of all the spirits of each of the planets. We have the titles, 72 names for the spirits of Saturn, for example. And if we recite these names and these titles, then we can get hold of these spirits. They will come down and become incarnate as human beings, and we can get them to obey us and come underneath our power. But on the other hand, you have the much more almost incorporeal spirits which are very, very fine vapor or very fine fumes. Even music is regarded as being a spirit, a very, very fine spirit, which passes from the musician to his hearers. And these, one might say, there are sort of Stoic origins to this idea of spirit being all around us and being the effector of things within the world. And these spirits don't have to be anthropomorphized, they don't have to have names, but you just have to know that by saying, by speaking in a certain way, or by making fumes, or even by thought exchange, as it were, these spirits go from person to person, from person to animal, or from person to organic subject, organic substance. If anything, I would say that this Hermetic literature, what is dominant in this Hermetic literature is the idea of the spirit in various manifestations. If not only because the word spiritus, in Arabic ruhani, or spiritual objects, spiritus spiritualis, so occurs so frequently.
Thank you. The second question is about something.
Sorry, what is your name?
Lorenzo Cecchetti.
Lorenzo, yes.
It was when we were reading about the reiteration of some knowledge from before the soul is incarnate.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
I was like the fact that it is retains in the form of images.
Images, yes.
It struck me.
Well, that again
like
is
some sort of...
Well, it needs some explanation, I suppose, or it is deliberately ambivalent in its meaning, because, of course, image, idea, eidos, these words can just as easily refer to forms. And surah in Arabic means both a form, a Platonic form, and an image. And the tasawwur is the imagination, the human imagination, where we can store all the images. And this is probably more of an Arabic statement, really. The images are stored in the human mind. But also in the Gentiloquium that I was referring to, attributed to Ptolemy, which was a very popular work and translated very frequently, you have the contrast between the objects, the external objects, which are only imitations of forms. They're just particulars, or they're particulars in respect to the universals, which could be identified with the forms. But in the mind of man, you have the complete ones. So that's another thing that makes what is within powerful over what is without.
So it's the one in the mind of man is the same. It's the same. Really that image, like the Platonic form. Or is it also sort of?
Yes. I suppose. I mean, it all fits into the idea that when you're thinking about things, the mind is divided into three parts, and you've got the. Well, what's probably a bit confusing is that the fantasia it's where all the sensations are collected, but not processed, as it were. And then at the back you have the memory, and then in the middle you have the reason. And the reason deals with these images that the fantasia is collecting, and by comparison with what it's already experienced in the memory, I suppose, it then makes sense of them and acts with them. So you have that, and so whether those suwar in Arabic or those formae which the fantasia collects are indeed assimilable to Platonic forms is a question, but I mean it depends what's happening in the brain. I mean whether these imitations, as it were, forms, these particularities of forms in the outer world are actually transformed in the human being to the actual universals or the forms. And to use the same word for both is a convenient way of dealing with that question.
I find it very Platonic to say, to use the same word to mean all the spectrum.
Yes, well, of course, I mean the Aristotelian universals to particulars, this is very different from Plato's forms and the imitations of forms, but because the universals, well, you know all about that. I mean, the universals are not are not independent, as it were, independent substances, whereas Platonic forms are in some way or other, and it's more common to think of them as being within the mind of God than within the mind of man. But I think there's so much of this Hermetic literature which compares man to God anyway. Man is the second creator with these powers that he has through an ascetic way of life and so on, through these powers that he acquires through secret traditions, as you were mentioning, because the practitioner has an elite position in society. He can imitate the actions of God, and so if God has forms in his mind, why not man have the forms in his mind?
It's also a way to, well, in the bottom, never mind. The third question is something that came up yesterday actually, and I asked the Professor Levi, sort of, but when do we can divide Hermeticism from alchemy, let's say? How they differ, if the tradition...
Well, that's also a very interesting question, and well, you know very well the beginning of the Maslama al-Qurtubi's Rutbat al-Hakim, which is a parallel to his Gayat al-Hakim, but his Rutbat is all on alchemy. But he divides, no, sorry, it's the Gayat that divides magic, Sihr, into three. And one, I love this division, but I didn't want to, I avoided quoting it here, but he divides it all in reaction, concerning the relation, in terms of the relation between spirit and body. So spirit is there again. And he describes spirit as being what happens in the case of Naranj. The Naranj, because it's all about the fumes and the spirits, as it were. And the relationship of spirit to body is obviously the talisman, because you're bringing the spirit into the substance, the bodily substance. And the relationship of body to body is alchemy, because you are combining two bodies, usually base metals, in order to make a higher. So for Maslama, alchemy was simply a branch of magic, a major, one of the three branches. And then he wrote this book, Bat al-Hakim, which is all about alchemy as magic, as it were. But that's not necessary. It's not necessary, though, to say that everything which is magic is also hermetic. And I think one finds that, in fact, not so many alchemical texts are attributed to Hermes.
So few.
So few, okay. I mean, most of them are anonymous, but maybe, you know, it's Jabir ibn Hayyan, and it's Lul or pseudo-Lul, but not pseudo-Hermes. But if you can talk about pseudo-Hermes or Apollonius, they're not regarded as authors. So, but you could say that there are elements shared by alchemy and Hermetic works which are attributed to Hermes and could be regarded as Hermetic philosophy. The big question, which all of us are asking, is whether and how one can regard Hermetic philosophy as a self-contained philosophy, different from other philosophies, you know, or whether we're just dealing with works which happen to be attributed to Hermes, which have certain characteristics. And I'm inclined to think that there is a philosophy there, but it has to be defined in more carefully than it has been up to now.
Thank you.
Domande?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Mine is...
Can I have your name first?
Yeah,
please?
Giorgio.
Giorgio.
Yeah, 3 anni. Yeah, mine is more a curiosity.
Yes.
I'd like to go back to the frontispiece.
Yes.
And on the handout you wrote that both Hermesis and Apollonius are an amalgamation of both Oriental and European myths.
Well, actually, I mean, I didn't say, but what's curious about Hugo of Santalla, he knows the classical tradition very much, and he wouldn't have found that information about Hermes or Pseudo or Apollonius in Arabic sources. That was his own addition because of his knowledge of classical texts.
Okay.
And Apollonius is called in Arabic Barlinus. It's just a transliteration of the... And in fact, it's amazing that Hugo recognized Barlinus as Apollonius because of his classical training. But I'm not sure how much we know, how much information there is in Arabic texts about the personality, the biography of Barlinus. More about Hermes. In fact, he was regarded as 3 different Hermes. One was the Egyptian one lived before this flood, and one lived after the flood. I think you were talking about this yesterday, but
very short.
Yes, but very little, I think, about Barlinus.
Okay, thank you.
Altre domande? Curiosità? Please.
Okay, my name is Marco, and thank you so much for your interesting lesson.
Marco, yes.
Yeah, we met yesterday. Just a two quick questions. The first, if you can say something more about the difference between a mirage and talismans, and the way they actually work, especially with some reference with the sympathy and antipathy relation, because I remember, for example, the great book of talismans of Apollonio of Tiana or Balinus in the Arabic tradition, and here we have a lot of anecdotes of Balinus entering a city, crafting a talisman, which has the same shape of of an animal as you shown us, like a scorpion. Yes, whereas the mirage works more with spiritus or astrological influence. If I understand well, if you can say just something more.
If I were boasting, I could say, I invented the mirage. No, it's just that it became quite clear in looking at these texts that the mirage was a distinct kind of magical process, as it were, from talismans. And as already in mathematical Quotrupy, I mean, it is distinct, but it is works with spirit, spirit on spirit. Sorry, but I think there is a little bit there is some overlap. What you find in some of these mirage recipes, of which there are many in the Gayat al-Hakim, is that talismans are included. The mirage is the whole sort of process. I mean, there are two kinds of mirage. There's one which is simply mixing ingredients and making the fumes. Burning the ingredients and making the fumes. But there's another, especially in the Gayat al-Hakim, where you have the Egyptian Kinas making a mirage for getting the love of a girl. And that involves all kinds of things, not just cooking things, but it's wearing special clothes, it's chanting certain things, but also it includes making talismans. So the talisman is, as it were, subordinate to the mirage. And on the other hand, talisman, very often, in my opinion, does not simply mean the object into which the spirit or the soul is enticed, attracted, but it means a process. And this is also implied by the original Greek, in which apotelisma, or the word teleo, means the perfection of things, making perfections and achieving perfection. So I mean, both talismans and mirage can be described either as objects or as processes. But I think one can, even if there is a bit of overlap, one can quite distinctly, one can distinguish between the two. In my classical article on the mirage, what complicated matters was that when the word was translated into Latin, the Latin translators didn't know what to do with it. So, but it is, I think, indicative that usually they translated it simply as opus. It's just the action. It's an action, as it were, which has a certain effect. But it would have been much clearer if Latin writers invented or transmitted a particular term for the mirage.
Okay, thank you so much. And just a second very quick question. It was striking to me to see that when the Hermetic literature enters the West tradition, as you've shown us, the storytelling of the discovery of books is almost the same, because Hugo of Santalla, you've shown us, says he finds the book in a library in a very hidden place, and it comes to my mind the Kitab Dairat al-Iskandar, the book of the treasure of Alexander, that's exactly the same with the Abbasid Caliph al-Muqtasim finding a book hidden in a library of a Christian monastery. So do you think Hugo reenacted the same storytelling tradition, or he founded it anew?
I think there's a whole article, even a whole book about finding hidden things, finding books indeed in caves, and and so it's not at all distinctive of the story of Apollonius. I mean, it's strange that, as Apollonius is alleged to have said, nobody thought of digging underneath the statue of Hermes, although it said very clearly, if you dig underneath me, you will find. So it is obviously following a tradition of finding hidden books and secret literature.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, thank you for your lecture. I have actually a quick curiosity.
Curiosity?
Yeah, it's
So
more
what's your name?
curiosity. Margherita.
Marina. Yes.
It's just at the beginning of your lecture,
Yes.
you mentioned, I apologize, do you have a handout just for the name in Arabic? Because I do not speak Arabic and I wouldn't want to make some...
Well, I don't have just the text itself. Yes.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
It's just a quick curiosity about here, Almaditis. Then,
Yes.
okay, then you mentioned that some of the things that are present in this text have some parallels to this tradition and can be recognized in the Zoroastrian ideas. I don't know if you went like further in this, but it would be really interesting to, this comparative aspect, to dig further into it.
Sorry, the comparative.
With the here is written that parallels to this tradition can be recognized in Zoroastrian ideas.
Oh, I see. Zoroastrian.
Referring, yeah.
Yes. Well, there have been some studies, especially by someone called Reisenstein, on Persian sources for Arabic literature. I mean, it's not surprising because when the second dynasty of the Arabs, the Abbasids, conquered Baghdad, they were in fact conquering basically the Persian capital. I mean, the Persian capital was just a little bit south of Baghdad, a place called Ctesiphon, but they were taking over Persian culture, and they were, well, you could say, Arabizing the Mesopotamia, which had been very much under control of Persia. And the Zoroastrian was he was the sage, the founder indeed of the Zoroastrian religion, a religion based on the worship of fire. We celebrated Nowruz just a couple of days ago. Nowruz, which is the beginning of the Persian New Year, and that's a Zoroastrian festival, And so, in the early days, just after the conquest of Baghdad in 750 AD, you could say that more culture was brought in to the Arabic world than from Greek or Syriac and this included a large amount of astrology and astronomy, and certain things which are recognizable, parallels are recognizable in Zoroastrian thought. And this idea of Hardus educating Adamnus, and the way that Adamnus obviously is the biblical Adam, but the way that Adamnus is described is very much like the way that the Zoroastrian first man in Zoroastrian religion is described. So there is certainly...
There are some parallels.
Yeah.
I was just curious because I'm really interested in comparative stuff, so
yes,
it was just a personal curiosity. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Gaia Mart. I knew you would ask a question.
My name is Pasquale.
Pasquale, yes.
Well, the point is, yeah, right. The question is related to geomancy, but first of all, I'd like to say thanks very much indeed for your lecture about this very interesting transformation of Arabic Latin tradition in its both aspect, scientific and theoretical too. And well, the question is, you know, I am preparing the critical edition of Hugo. Yeah, right. Ars Geomantia. Well, yeah, right. Yeah. Well, the point is, you know, one of the most important problem in the Hermetic scholarship is to define what is an Hermetic text. An Hermetic text. Yeah. Well, in my inspection of the Latin tradition, which is made up of 15 witnesses, well, just in one of these, the most important in my opinion, we have a reference at the end of the text to Enoch. Well, the question is, can we attribute to Hermes, can we say the Ars Geomantiae translated by Hugo, considered just on the basis of this evidence, an Hermetic text, in your opinion, or not?
Can the fact that it's attributed to Enoch?
Yeah, Enoch, yeah, right.
But it's very curious that we should mention Enoch, which, of course, in the Jewish tradition is Hermes.
Yeah.
That Hugo also knew that Enoch was Hermes. Did he?
Yeah.
He recognized Enoch as being Hermes.
Well, there's a general reference in this little text written in the form of the accessus ad auctorem, and you know, the wisdom is reconnected to Enoch. In this, you know, this is one of the third Hermes, and so I have just this evidence in one manuscript, the most important of the tradition. But you know, what's your opinion?
Ancient sage, as it were, to confirm the knowledge that he is imparting to his readers. Yes. Okay. So that's very interesting that he should include the Hebrew tradition, which he probably knew, because at least one of his works is Ibn the work by Ibn al-Muthanna on astronomical tables was also translated by Ibn Ezra, who lived just down the road in Toledo, which is very close to Tarazona. So you know, it's quite possible that he was collaborating with Ibn Ezra. They knew each other's work. They knew each other's sources.
Okay, and well, another point, just my personal idea. You know, in the Latin Asclepius is described an ancient telestic practice of including spirits in the stage for worshipping and asking the deity to do good or bad actions. So could we consider the medieval talismanic magic as a sort of transformation of this ancient telestic religious practice, you know, a sort of way from a religion to a practical scientific way in the Middle Ages?
I think, well, again, Antonella knows all about this, but no. I think that you know, what is happening in the 12th century. I mean, the Asclepius was rediscovered at the end of the 11th century, I think. You know, and what is happening is that we do have these two streams coming together. And although there's no evidence of any part of the Corpus Hermeticum being translated into Arabic, some of the ideas are very, very similar, and they were recognized as being very similar in the later 12th century, and William of Auvergne presumably was aware of the similarities, and this just corroborated really the ideas of one to the other.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed.
Are there any questions? I would like to say something. Thank you very much, Charles, because you have discovered that John of Sevilla.
Oh.
Is John of Sevilla
Yeah.
the translator of the Quattro Confezionibus?
This is the conclusion of Hasse, Dag Nicolaus Hasse. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's published this, but he has devised this very fine method of recognizing translators through the words that they use, especially the little words, the conjunctions, and not terms, but the words for and therefore, and we say that, and so on, and it seems to be similar to what we know about John of Sevilla's translations, and it suits his character too. I mean, it's the kind of thing he might have translated.
But the very strange thing is that we have only in the 13th century the scholars talk about the Latin translation of the Liber de Quattro Confezionibus. Just one century later, after the translation.
That's a good point. Yes. But that might be partly because, as you keep emphasizing, it was a secret text. These were all secret texts, and they were passed on sort of under the table and not made public until. Well, I mean, it's just amazing how many of these texts, both William of Auvergne and, of course, the Speculum, how many of them are known, even though they don't exist in manuscripts at that time. I mean, somehow they had a hidden transmission.
Yes.
And what is what I've said in the past, I don't know whether this has been disproved, but the 12th century was a remarkably open century. People were interested in these texts and translated them and read them, and then for various reasons in the 13th and 14th century they were hidden. It was only in the times of Ficino and the late 15th century that people became aware of these texts and started reading them. They were there all the time, but the manuscripts are all very late, 15th, 16th, 17th century.
Thank you so much. And just a curiosity, what is the relationship, according to you, between your alternative tradition of Pseudo-Aristotelian texts devoted to lunar mention and learned magic texts?
What you're suggesting, that the lunar mention texts are belong to a more popular level.
Learned magic, David Pingree call learned magic some text attributed to, very well, thoughts, De Viginti.
I mean, I would call all of this learned magic, actually. All these texts written in Latin and written in Arabic, but they are not the same kind of magic as you find amongst the people. There's a bit of trickle down, and in the Alcandreana from earlier on, you see that people are using the Alcandreana, old women sitting on the street, telling fortunes. But I think Herman of Corinthia at one stage, when he's addressing his colleague Robert of Ketton, he says, "You remember when we came out of the aditus, the shrines or the inner sanctuaries of Minerva, we were afraid of telling the general public about what we'd learned there. And I think this is a recurring idea, that you are learning things which must not be generally diffused. And for that very reason, you could call this learned magic. It wasn't for the general populace, but it was, well, it might be going too far to say that it was a very selfish thing to do. What you wanted to do was to raise your own self through these magical texts to a higher level than the rest of humanity, and be kind of rulers in the spirit over your fellow men and women. And that might give you a little bit of to boast about yourself, which you might not have done otherwise.
So we have so many different kind of magic.
Yes.
Of hermetic magic.
Well, yes, I think it's for that reason it's useful to have the term.
On the basis of the formal attribution.
Yes, I mean, I think it is very useful to be able to talk about hermetic magic. As long as you confine that to works which are specifically attributed to Hermes or to the tradition of Hermes, Apollonian magic as well, but that is also part of hermetic magic. And then one would be able to say, well, other works don't fit into this category and must be regarded as being popular magic, or incantations, the things you write on the De Fictiones, throw into the water and so on.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for listening to me.